So Hunter x Hunter chapter 407 is out, and first of all, we mainly focus on one particular perspective for more or less 80% of the chapter, and it has to do with a card game. Only Togashi could somehow make an entire chapter on a card game right now that he just made up and make it incredibly tense. But we'll get into that once we get into the actual chapter. But overall, this might actually be my shortest review for this series yet. Watch this be 20 minutes long. I cannot stop yapping half the time. But here's the thing. This chapter, very good. Really nice setup. Also presents Morena in a bit more of a menacing way, despite her being menacing as of right now. And also we might get the answer to who Morena was looking for in the previous chapters. But for all we know, it could just be a bit of a misdirect, for all we know. But we'll get into how things are in a second. Before we jump into things, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. Now then, on with the chapter. Chapter 407 of Hunter x Hunter, titled Negotiation. And we start this chapter off with the rest of Hulkenberg's funeral processions. As we see people grieving, we see people looking at the casket as it moves onwards up to the higher tiers. And we actually get a date and time right now. It's day 12 of the journey at 1 p.m. Now at first, I did not really think anything of it. However, I've seen people talking about this previously online, and turns out everything that was going on with Kurapika was like in the morning, and when everything started, it was all in the morning, the last couple of things that we've seen. So a couple of hours have passed, so we jumped forward in time, and there's just a couple of hours that are just unaccounted for right now, so we'll probably jump back perspective, which is kind of how this arc has been, and what the first like 3 to 4 chapters of this entire batch of chapters have been. So we might get a bit of a backwards tracking in time to see what happened during the funeral procession, because we're literally at the end of it, at least in this section of the Black Whale, as Hulkenberg's body is being taken up to tier 1. So with all this going on, we actually cut back to Saragnit's like personal group. They're talking about one of their allies, their friends, Borkson, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, and that she's missing, and that she was part of a certain section for the funeral procession, and they're wondering if she was potentially kidnapped or went after a lead. They're thinking that it's possibly a Nen ability that either manipulated her, or maybe it could have been a heil-ly assassin that abducted her or even killed her. There's a lot of things that they're speculating about on what exactly happened to her and how it all went down. And they also go over the fact that if one of them was caught, like an agreement they made chapters ago, if they were caught, no negotiations, no rescue, and they're even asking, are they going to stick to that plan? While some of Benjamin's troops are telling them to spread out and keep doing their jobs because the procession's not fully over yet and they're still on high alert. And so now they're going to have to decide on things before all is said and done for their current shifts. Now, these are Saragnit's friends that were introduced in the last match chapters 2 years ago. They were only seen for like a chapter and a half, diving deeper into the factions, making things a bit more fleshed out. And this chapter focuses on Morena and Borkson, as we cut to her waking up in the heil-ly hideout facing Morena herself. Also, I just like that we have like a 2-page spread of just Morena and Borkson staring each other down, as well as Borkson getting the lay of the land of the situation, as she is surrounded by 5 other heil-ly members outside of Morena. So this seemingly implies, with Morena now asking Borksev to join her, but they're not going to do it by force, and we'll go over why she's going to try and persuade her to join them eventually. This seems to imply that Borksev seems to have been the person that Morena was looking for, was having Dogman look for in the previous few chapters. Now, this is interesting, and I right now cannot think of how she could apply to Morena, but for all we know, if she can somehow get her onto her side, perhaps even forcefully, and give her a contagion and do something to help awaken a Nen ability, she might have a Nen ability laden within her that could be a great benefit to Morena, which is something that I've also seen some people talking about, especially considering that there's like a very big imbalance in terms of Morena's fighting force for the type of Nen users, because I think they only have like some conjurers, transmuters, and some enhancers, I believe. So they're kind of running. They don't really have any. They don't have any specialists. They don't have any people with other types of Nen, but like manipulation and stuff like that. So perhaps Broskie has a Nen ability, perhaps that could have done something. But Dogman ended up stating that if he gets close to somebody, he can find out their Nen type or Nen ability. And the guy he was with could abduct somebody no problems if they don't have Nen. So this implies that they were looking for somebody that hadn't awakened Nen, but has the potential to awaken Nen. And since someone is born with their Nen typing, their Nen affinity, Dogman can sniff that out, which is what I'm getting at. So that's pretty interesting to think about. And I'm curious to see what type of abilities will be and what kind of advantage this will be for Morena. But she, instead of doing a regular negotiation, proposes a card game that she calls the negotiation game. And she pulls out a bunch of themed cards and she lays them all out on the table. And this is basically the entire chapter going over the card game, setting things up for their negotiations. Morena has 7 cards face up that Broskie can choose from, and whatever she chooses from these cards, Morena has to abide by these. Meanwhile, Broskie has 5 cards face down, and this game is essentially like a yes or no game, and that's kind of what she's perhaps limited to. If she forfeits the game, she has no freedom other to answer anything with yes or no, even outside of the game. And so, based on how things are like, Broskie originally thinks there's 4 yeses and 1 no, but that's not the case. She actually has 1 yes, 1 no, and a return card, which allows her to take any card from her graveyard and return it into play, which once a card is chosen by the opposing player, it goes to the graveyard regardless. Then there's the Joker, which can be yes or no, so it can be either or, and then there's the X card, which allows Broskie to just abstain from the game, leave the game without any repercussions whatsoever. Doesn't have to answer yes or no. She doesn't have to do anything they say. They essentially get to leave scot-free based on how this is played out. We then get a couple pages of Broskie trying to go over the fact of how this game seems to be stacked in Morena's favor, but in how things seem to be, it might be more stacked towards her favor with the amount of options she has. So this might be a bit of a mind game to try and get Broskie to essentially comply at the end of the day. Leave her with some yeses and no nos, but it all depends on the question or request that ends up happening. And so, yes and no aren't really her friend here. Either or could just screw her over in the worst ways possible. As with this, we also get an explanation of Morena's 7 cards. There's the aim card, which if Broskie chooses that, Morena gets to explain her goals in detail. With that, Broskie has the opportunity to learn about what Morena's up to in this game, in this entire contagion game that she's doing with her entire mafia gang to destroy everything. So that is very tantalizing as something to understand and know about. Next, she has the power card, which allows her to explain her abilities. And although it might go over her head a bit, since obviously Broskie is not an actual Nen user, doesn't fully understand or comprehend Nen, she can only tell the truth without hiding anything. And she'll go into as much detail as she wants. But that is actually a very interesting thing. Considering the fact that Broskie isn't a experienced Nen user, or potentially doesn't even fully comprehend how Nen works, this will play to Morena's entire factors. It'll actually be in favor of Morena if Broskie picks that, because she can just tell the truth about her ability to a certain extent, perhaps even half the truth of her ability, and leave something hidden in order to kind of convince Broskie that she shared all the information that she needed. So that way she can just give a good enough explanation of her ability, and Broskie could potentially be satisfied with that and think that she shared her entire ability. So that in and of itself plays into Morena's favor, even if she does explain her ability. But she does, within this entire explanation, whenever she goes over the cards, she says the longer this game takes, there's going to be more risk to both of them. And so they have to talk pretty quickly. So perhaps there are some sort of conditions, because this might actually be a Nen ability. The cards might be Morena's actual Nen ability. I'll go once we finish these explanations, I'll go over the possibility of that. This is something that's been talked about since this chapter released already, but I'll go over that later. But after the power card expanding her abilities, she reveals the question A card, which allows Morena to answer as many questions and as many times as Borksiv wants. But it has to be something that doesn't have to do about her goals or her ability. Most likely because there are cards for that as well. But any answers to her questions will only be in the form of yes or no. So that is also a bit of a limitation that seems like to be in both the favor of Morena. So that is pretty interesting to see. But there's also another card, which is question B, which is actually a card that allows Morena to further explain an answer to the question that is asked with question A. But as pertaining to the exact same question, it can't be a new question. So if something is asked to Morena with question A and Borksiv needs more information, she can pick the question B card to get a bigger and more detailed explanation for anything that was potentially left out for the most part until she is satisfied. Now, obviously, one big concern is cheating, as these games tend to be, and Borksiv just flat out asked her if she's actually planning on cheating in this game or not. Now, what's interesting is that this panel doesn't only focus on Morena, but we also get too many panels on the side of her of two of her other companions, two of her other members of the heil-ly. And that's very interesting because while she ultimately says no, she will not cheat, and that's an answer from her perspective because we end up going over a whole big quandary over the negative connotations of questions and answers of yes and no and how it could apply to the question in general, like agreeing with it or disagreeing with it or being a more personal aspect, which is honestly an incredibly detailed, nuanced way of looking at yes and no to answering a question, which is HunterxHunter. I should have expected something like this to be a bit more in detail, but either way, it's a pretty interesting thing to think about when it comes to just answering questions in yes or no. But yeah, the reason I bring up the fact that Morena brings this up and says, no, I will not cheat, answering the question from her perspective means that she herself will not cheat. However, the fact that we focused on two other characters when she was asked if she was cheating, yes or no, implies that the rest of the people in this room could do something to cheat in Morena's favor to end up placing things on her to actually win the game, and have Borksiv lose. So that is interesting because Borksiv definitely, at this point, hasn't thought of the fact that the people surrounding her could cheat in this game if Morena is the one dealing. Or perhaps, I believe one of her allies is dealing in this instant. Now, the thing I do like also, while Borksiv is trying to rationalize everything with all the cards, is the fact that Morena is incredibly angry, and she can sense it. She's not a NEN user, but Borksiv can sense the fact that Morena has so much anger within her despite her calm demeanor. And this will probably end up working to her favor or her detriment, because if she plays her cards right, she can use this to essentially get a tell off Morena to get a win off in this game. But at the same time, Morena could also use her anger to an advantage, making it incredibly obvious for her opponent, and thus lulling them into a false insecurity, and thus winning the game by having them pick the wrong card at the wrong time. So, yeah, that is pretty interesting to really consider, because with a game like this, it's all a mind game to an extent. Strategy and a mind game to get into your opponent's head based on their tells, their emotional state, and their tone of voice. So this is pretty interesting to really get into. Now, the last card Morena talks about and shows is the deal card, which allows Borksiv to pick any card that she wants from the graveyard and bring it back into play. However, there is one big caveat. She has to grant a small request of Morena. What that could be, we got no idea. But that's the interesting thing. Any request she asks for. But Morena does state that once she hears what the request is, Borksiv can in fact not do it. But if that's the case, it becomes Morena's turn and deal will go to the graveyard. And the game ends when Borksiv has one card left, which means she has to win the game when she is down to 2. That is her last chance. When she has 2 cards in play, then yeah, she's done. So that's all the rules for the card games and all the cards. And now the game essentially begins with the shuffling. So that ends the chapter for this issue of Hunter x Hunter. So yeah, we had an explanation of an entirely brand new card game, which might be a Nen ability, surprisingly enough, because this is something that was brought up in some discussions that I've seen, is that Morena's Nen ability is Contagion. We all know that. But with how the Contagion works, by the time you reach level 20, you get to unlock a Nen ability. Then once you reach, I believe, level 30 or 50, it's around there, you unlock your own Hatsu. And Morena should be about level 50 at this point, maybe over that, last I checked. Which means Contagion might be her main ability, but with how Contagion works, she could potentially have awakened a brand new Nen ability on top of her own. It's not impossible for people to have extensions to their Nen abilities or try to develop a new Nen ability that's like adjacent to their Nen type. It's pretty obvious, but it's a lesser control. But if Contagion allows her to create an entirely new Nen ability, and that might be this card game, that would in fact be really interesting and make things a lot scarier. Now, with how this card game works, like I said, it's just a whole mental battle of fortitude and try to get into your opponent's head and try and get all their cards out of play. And just get what she needs to do. Now, Borksiv's cards are face down, so it's all a game of chance. But like I mentioned earlier, very possible that her allies in this area will potentially cheat in Morena's favor. So that's always the case, that will happen. Like I said earlier, Borksiv could be the person that Morena did need, but again, this could just be something that's going on entirely separately, and there's somebody else that we're looking for, and Borksiv is just a red herring to kind of lull us into a false security to reveal something else is what Morena was looking for, but as of right now, this seems to be the case for who Morena was looking for. So I'm excited to see where this turns out, because if Togashi plays his cards right, if he does this in a way that I have faith that he will be a tense chapter of mind games, getting each other's heads and trying to read each other. The closest thing I can think of from something that I most recently watched was like, I'm going to have to make a JoJo's reference here, but in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3, when Jotaro played against the older Darby brother in a game of poker, and he was just doing random stuff with Star Platinum to try and get in his head and get him to fold, despite the fact that he didn't look at his hand, and his hand ended up being completely another ass. But Darby still ended up just succumbing to the pressure of the situation, thinking that the game got rigged in Jotaro's favor with Star Platinum with how fast he is. That's the type of tension I really want this to be on some level, because you can make a game of poker, you can make anything tense with enough stakes, with enough build-up, and the way things are presented. And I think Togashi's going to do that. And this is funny because we got basically the main antagonist of this arc, Morena, which she might be the main antagonist of this arc based on how much focus we're getting on her outside of Surrounded, so that's pretty interesting. And a side character. That is interesting. I think only Togashi can really do this, especially with the character that was introduced 2 years ago. And only had like 5 lines, so that's interesting to really think about. But yeah, that's all I really have to say for this chapter of Hunter x Hunter right now, and this definitely is coming close to 20 minutes at this point, probably. But let me know what you guys think of this chapter in the comment section down below. How do you feel things are going to progress with this? Are we going to cut to somebody else while this is going on to further build attention? Will we finish this part of this card game in the next chapter or two? What do you think Morena plans to do with Borksiv and her purpose for going out of her way to find her? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps me ensure you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. I'm going to try and do some more Hunter x Hunter content in between chapter reviews if I have the time. It'll be a similar format to this. Might not be as heavily edited, but I'll let you guys know in advance. But for now, I want to try to do more Hunter x Hunter stuff every now and again, but for now, just chapter reviews. So let me know how you guys feel. And with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.